Yeah, I mean, a little bit. So let me switch over here. Let me actually hide my video too, just in case. Oh, shoot, now I lost all my Zoom stuff. Okay. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right. So 11D. 11D is like Jekyll. It's a static site generator. Basically run one command and it figures out what file formats you have and converts it into a website here. So you can create a whole website with just markdown files, run this 11D command, and it'll output a site. It's pretty cool. I'm really, we're really into static site generators. We just went, full bore and have been using HAX CMS for all of our static sites, which is a website that's completely runs on web components. But in this case, for that Bones app that I've been working on and I've been showing in some past videos, our 3D artist has been going through and for every bone asset, he's been creating an index.html file. So what he gave me was a whole folder of index.html files. So using 11D, I was able to create that into a usable static site with just one command, which is pretty awesome. So 11D goes through, finds all of the index.html files, and then outputs them into a directory that looks, a file structure that looks very similar than what I gave it. But what it allows you to do is add layouts to it. So I can create a default layout for all of these index.html files that looks something like this. And I can start converting my index.html files to something like this, where I'm still using HTML, but I can add some head matter into it to give it dynamic properties. So it's pretty cool. It's probably the easiest static site generator I've ever seen, which is why a lot of people like it. So now web components. So this is a good example of what the typical developer would run into whenever they think about, okay, well, how do I add some web components to it? And I'm trying to think of what's the absolute easiest approach to this. I mean, we could get into all of the build routines and everything to hook something like that up, but what is just the easiest thing to get started? Well, what we could do is we could go into here, and I'm going to add a script for, let's see here. Oh, did I blow that away? I'm going to add a script, type module, and I have under the assets, JS, app.js. Okay. All right, so I think that is now in there. Let's go to assets. Okay, so I'm gonna console log that out, just say hi there, just to make sure that we had this all set up correctly. Okay, so instead of going through the whole build process, it would be amazing if I could just start importing files. So something like this, to where this is your typical web component. And you can see that I'm pulling in dependencies. But instead of pulling them in from a node modules directory, I'm actually referencing them from the CDN. So I'm pulling in lit element, I'm pulling in mobx for state management, and I'm creating a web component on the fly without any build step. Now this, there was a build step, obviously. So what we do is we have a list of all of our components, or all of our web components, and we do run a build that turns them into an ES6 bundle, and we put them on a CDN. And what that would allow you to do is just basically copy and paste these references, and I can now start adding those to my static site. So if I say, what's this called? HAX CMS Bones theme. Okay, let's see. So I should see HAX CMS Bones theme. And if I refresh, voila, there we go. So that is just, that is an incredible workflow. No build step, no nothing. We're just referencing dependencies straight from the CDN. If you remember back in the jQuery plugin days and how amazing that was, we're back there. We can all celebrate.
You're back there. I mean, that's a lot of people also use Pika. Pika's trying to push a vision of local development like that too, except Pika's resolves and compiles on the fly, which is pretty sick.
Yes. And they have the Pika CDN that does that on the fly. They also have the Snowpack, which is a sort of a middle ground between the full build step and it like installs the modules locally, and you reference them using not bear, but what's it called? Not bear imports, but
oh, you use like
dot
web
slash. Yeah.
Yeah, you use like web modules, resolved imports. And because we have certainly a mix of skill sets tuning in here as far as front end dev, when you're referring to compiled or built assets, the thing that Mike is showing right now, this code will work on roughly 90% of browsing traffic, just because of where web standards are. But there's certain conventions that I'm sure Mike even used in his little example, like fat arrow, that is not supported in all, editions of JavaScript for all time. So yeah, right there with the auto run. So the reason you run build routines or have to compile things in part is so that it helps resolve those conventions from niceties for us to use into things that vast majority of browsers can accept.
Right. So, so this is really cool. I really like that workflow. Now, Brian sent me that magic importer.
Oh my
and he
God.
said, "Here, try
use
this."
the magic.
Yeah, so we're gonna try the magic importer, which is just, it's killer. So what we're gonna do is, and Brian did a deep dive on this in previous episodes, but what this does is it loads the off of our CDN. It loads this build script, which starts to, does it preload anything right off the bat, or does it set up listeners for undefined components?
So what the build, I mean, you can go to the build file, you can, if you care to, but it's effectively figuring out it's feature detecting what version to send you. And then it's going to load up right there as wc-registry.json. And that is now part of our build routine, that it figures out what web components there are amongst the files it's compiling and then creates this big object. So I say big object, but ultimately compressed, it's less than 1K, I think. Which then it does a document.query selector all, and it just hits star at the moment and looks for anything that it finds in that has a hyphen. Then after the hyphen, it looks and sees what isn't defined, and then if it matches that object, it automatically imports it. So this is effectively a universal way of shipping web components into anything in a relatively performant way. I should probably dig up the tweet thread that I had with a guy from Google, because he was analyzing it, I think a little bit kind of like, what the heck is this? but yeah, so that's effectively what it's doing. You have access to any tag as you type it. So the fact that rcoder shows up in there, if you type rcoder, it'll work in this, and it'll only import the things required for rcoder.
Yep. And the way that rcoder works is it injects this VS Code tag into the DOM, and then it expects to be given an endpoint, and the endpoint would actually be able to compile this on the fly. So the process button right now is grayed out because it doesn't have access to a running microservice. But that's as easy as it could be to add that little R code functionality to your site. Now, so taking it one step beyond that, as I said, that we use HAX CMS for most of our static sites, but you can actually use HAX CMS elements, which are all web components, inside of another CMS. So sounds confusing, but what I have here is an 11D function. So 11D allows you to tie into its runtime. And what I've done is I've collected all of the files that 11D identified, and I've outputted a site.json file. And what a site.json file in HAX CMS land is, it's basically defining the entire navigation and all of the site information. So that HAX CMS, as soon as it loads, it looks for a site.json file so that it can start scaffolding out like its router and start hooking up all of its state management.
Did you get working what I think you got working?
We'll see. I haven't really tested this, so I kind of fingers crossed here. But if we look inside our site, which 11D outputs the built site in this _site directory. So we now have a site.json. Oops.
I have a question. So when you do your build site, is this like a general that everyone can use, or do you have things built in there for just say what you guys use in your departments?
In terms of web components?
Like you say your build file, you run the build file and it pulls in all of the
so it's totally general.
Okay, so it's not like you guys, my unit uses this, so we're only gonna do these. It's just literally everything.
Yeah, it gets a little, we'll keep showing pieces of the CDN part. I think you're thinking of the CDN part. So we run a routine that
I think so, yes.
Yeah, that throws a ton of stuff up on that CDN. So let's say that we worked on like a PSU logo tag that everybody could use. We would put that into our scripts to basically start building that, and then it would be available on the CDN with everything else. But the idea is we have this huge bucket of all available possible combinations. Everybody integrates the exact same way, and then we can have discussions via this or other channels to come up with new tags that we want as a university to be shipped. But the approach is entirely generic. National Archives is starting to move towards this as well, because they have a ton of properties. They don't entirely know what they're putting in the site, and they're not building applications. They're augmenting properties the way that I know that you do a lot of times, as far as like, hey, I have this theme that happens to be in WordPress. or in Drupal or whatever. So yeah, we're trying to build towards a much more augment existing properties and then throw whatever we want on there. But there is currently still just kind of like a people ask me and then I make it available workflow at the moment.
Yeah, because like Joe built us, and we're using build scripts, but it's definitely geared towards the things that we need and not what other people need. So I just didn't know if this was general or just your needs. Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that. But thank you.
Yeah, the idea is that this would definitely be general and repurposable to where you could, it would be a template for you to possibly create your own if you needed to. So that way, like, you could just have a CDN for you that maybe leverages, you know, a base CDN or something like that, or a base library like the PSU library, but you have curated your own CDN. That's a possibility too. But this, in this example, what you could do is, let's say that you're sick of doing, you know, spinning up WordPress sites over and over and over again and starting from scratch over again. What you could do here is we've now converted this this 11D static site into a HAX CMS capable site. So where if you take a look at all these site dash tags, those are all HAX CMS tags. And what they are is they have the state management wired into them. So we should be able to do something like this where I say, oh, I want a site title. And let's see here. Oh no, what'd I do? Oh, that's right. I need to actually hook up HAX CMS. All right. So this is how you get a HAX CMS site running. You basically point the HAX CMS site builder at the site.json file that we generated. And now we have this magic tag that we just put site title on there, and it's outputting this. Now it's outputting that from, let me see, from this information, probably, yeah, right here. So if we say Bones app, and we refresh, we now get Bones app, and it's clickable and everything. Now that's kind of just a basic example, but we could also do something where we use the site menu. So in HAX CMS, you can just type site menu and you get a full site hierarchy menu. Now it's not styled or anything, but these are all the pages that were found in 11D.
And it just doesn't have a title.
It just doesn't have a title. Gotcha. So let's say that we want to add a title. Now this is where the magic of 11D comes in, is that the structure is totally derived from the file system. And what that means is that you can add what's called head matter. So I can say title, and this is called Atlas. If I refresh, you'll now see Atlas there. So that's sort of an example of smushing two different magical static site generators together to create something really interesting. So you have the 11D that's just managing all the static files off the file system, and it's preparing, it's putting all that information together in a format where your web components can now react to it. So you could imagine this is how you might get past having a site that is pre-rendered, is server-side rendered, and it contains a bunch of HAX CMS or just web components built into it that whenever they are rendered to the page, they go to something like site.json, and sort of I'll take over from here. Single page application style. But anyhow, yeah, that is a pretty cool little funky script there.
Yeah, you got it working already.
Yeah.
I can't believe you like, that's ridiculous. I mean, and if you threw in the site.json as it got built, if you threw one of the valid themes, then suddenly this would start to look like a real website.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you threw in the learn to schema, which is rather mundane.
So would that make it easy for, say, Collins and myself to do some quick and dirty theming?
Maybe. Yeah, might.
Interesting.
Yeah, look at that. That's crazy.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, it's really not that much that you have to add into it. If you did, and it's just there anyway. Yeah. So if you click the pages, does the content render in the middle?
No, because I think my base tag is messed up there. Site.
Oh, I see. Yeah. But that's pretty minimal.
Yeah. That is pretty cool. What's another theme?
The if you do HAX or -11.
What?
HAXOR -sleven SLEVI. Yeah.
Oh, that's not a page.
Yeah, that path's not a thing. Maybe you spelled it wrong because it's insane.
SLE.
It's what my blog uses. Let me see.
Okay.
HAX Slevin SLEVIN.
HAX or?
Yeah, HAX or Slevin. I don't understand. Why is this so hard? HAX or Slevin, yeah.
That's what I have.
Maybe it just doesn't have the theme elements
it
on
might
it.
not. Yeah, the homepage. The homepage for that one is
okay.
Yeah, I might not load that one.
Gotcha. But yeah, that's very interesting. Cool. I will report back because that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that might be an interesting way of handling our publishing routine currently, or an aspect of our publishing routine, because I know Andrew ran into a ton of confusion around how to build custom stuff into a site. I know Chuck did previously because we're, making these conventions up as we go, basically. And Colin, one of my students, he also ran into that today of like, hey, where do I run yarn start from? Oh, do it from your site. Oh, where do I run yarn install from? Oh, it's somewhere else. That's completely different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that could be an interesting middle ground. Yeah, that's awesome, man.